Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today we'll do something unpleasant but necessary. Separate personalities from structures. People argue about Trump, Israel, Britain, the West, the East, morality, betrayal, sacred victims, and eternal guilt. The system behind all of that is much simpler and much colder. Segregated economic zones, competing elites, and politicians who think they are players while they are just well-fed pieces on someone else's board. We'll go through 3 layers. 1, how the world economy is quietly splitting into hostile and neutral clusters. 2, where Trump and the Make America Great Again project actually fit into this third. Why Israel and the Middle East look less like a moral tragedy and more like a controlled demolition site for someone else's benefit. Forget the fairy tale of one global market where everyone trades and hugs. That phase is over. Right now, the world is consolidating into separate economic zones, each with its own rules, currencies, logistics, and security systems. Call them clusters, blocks, empires, partnerships, if you like polite words. The content is the same. Inside the zone, you are almost equal. Trade, joint projects, shared standards. Outside the zone, you are either competitor or expendable buffer. This is not full autarky. Zones still trade with each other, but the logic has changed. Critical technologies and resources are locked into friendly circuits. Unfriendly states are pushed into dependency, energy, finance, weapons, transit. Information space is filtered so that each cluster has its own canon of good and evil. Call it segregation of the global economy. Not a wall with barbed wire, more like different gated communities with armed security and carefully selected neighbors. Sanctions, export controls, screening of investments, banned payment systems, blocked logistics, no-fly lists. These are not random news headlines. They are tools for sorting who belongs in which zone and on what conditions. Now place Trump into that picture. Make America Great Again sounded like a plan to rebuild real industrial and strategic power. In practice, the U.S. elite kept leaning on its main remaining universal asset, the dollar and the financial system around it. The logic is simple. As long as the dollar is the primary reserve currency, Washington can export paper and import real goods, resources, and loyalty. You can keep a huge military, large deficits, and buy political obedience with access to that system. The problem, to maintain this, the U.S. has to be everywhere at once and control the rules. That means expensive military presence, constant involvement in regional conflicts, pressure on allies to buy your weapons, your tech, your energy narratives. And there is a structural irritation here. U.S. weapons and systems are often very expensive at the point of use. For many states, especially those politely labeled developing or third world, paying a fortune for every missile launch or advanced system is not sustainable, especially when alternatives exist that are cheaper and good enough. So MAGA hits the wall. The U.S. wants to remain the global issuer of money and rules, but the rest of the world is increasingly price-sensitive, politically tired, and has more options. Attempts to force loyalty through pressure and sanctions only accelerate the formation of alternative zones. Trump's intuitive method is very straightforward. 1, tighten the economic noose around a target. 2, offer a deal to loosen it in exchange for concessions. Two-step diplomacy, effective in some cases, but it does not solve root causes of conflicts. It doesn't redesign the architecture, it just kicks around individual actors. That's why I'll stop this war in 24 hours. Sounds nice on TV, but crashes into reality when you ask who sells weapons, who controls credit, who needs the conflict to continue to avoid admitting previous mistakes. Once you pull that thread, you reach people far above any one president's ego. While American policy often looks like a battering ram, British strategic culture is different, less brute force, more long game with other people's hands. Historically, early banking and intelligence networks grew from Italian city-states to the Netherlands, then to Britain. Britain learned to work through indirect control, trade companies, local rulers, mercenaries, planted elites, covert operations. The empire shrank physically, but the habits and networks of influence stayed. Intelligence, finance, law, media, consultants, NGOs. The method is boringly consistent. Don't rush in with your own divisions if you can avoid it. Find ambitious or vain local actors. Make them believe that your scenario is their brilliant idea. Let them break the region for you, then arrive as mediator, guarantor, investor. In this sense, the U.S., with its size and firepower, can be used as a tool rather than a driver. A large, resource-intensive tool, but still a tool. Trump fits this pattern uncomfortably well. Strong ego, desire for historic status, craving for recognition, simple strategic horizon, sanction, deal, applause. Weak interest in multi-step 10 to 15-year plans. If you combine this with a skilled external lobby that feeds him the right talking points, frames particular steps as his personal triumph, hides long-term consequences behind short-term wins, you don't have a mastermind, you have a powerful amplifier of someone else's script. Now the sensitive part, Israel, not as a moral symbol, but as a structural asset in the regional game. For decades, Israel has been a military outpost with serious capabilities, a regional partner of the U.S. and other Western players. A state deeply embedded in Western intelligence, technology, and financial circuits. At the same time, the region around it is full of forces that see it as an occupying power, a rival for influence, or a convenient enemy for domestic mobilization. Into this cocktail comes the idea, let's bring in an international peacekeeping force, and Turkey can play a key role. Structurally, this means in the middle of an armed conflict between Israel and groups like Hamas, you propose to invite a state that is ideologically and politically close to movements related to those groups, has deep ties with certain Islamic networks, and is financially supported by regional sponsors. Under the banner of peacekeeping, you introduce a powerful regional player whose interests are not identical to Israel's survival or security. Even if Turkey formally comes as a neutral force, reality is more complex. Any loss of Turkish equipment in clashes can translate into new hardware in local hands. Any joint patrols and coordination give intelligence access and logistics routes to forces that are not exactly friendly to Israel. Surrounding militias and irregulars can use that cover to increase their own capabilities. From Israel's point of view, such a plan starts to look less like keeping the peace and more like importing a controlled escalation with Israel structurally disadvantaged. And behind such proposals, you can easily imagine external players, including old colonial powers, who are very comfortable with scenario B. One regional powers, Israel, Iran, Turkey, and others, are drawn into a long, weakening confrontation. 2. Everyone bleeds, militarily, economically, politically. 3. After enough damage is done, a responsible outside actor enters to reorganize flows of energy, money, and security on its own terms. Classic imperial pattern, let them exhaust each other, then come in clean with contracts and reconstruction packages. From a cold systemic angle, a harsh question appears. What if key external players are beginning to see Israel less as a core asset and more as a manageable risk or even a future bargaining chip? Possible logic? Israel is militarily strong but surrounded by demographic and political pressure. Its expansion and operations create constant reputational and diplomatic costs for allies. Balancing Israel, Gulf monarchies, Turkey, Iran, and various non-state actors becomes more and more expensive. In such a situation, some strategists may think along a cynical line. If Israel remains strong and obedient, keep it as a regional instrument. If it becomes too expensive or less controllable, slowly reshape the environment so that it either accepts new limits or is weakened enough that its future can be renegotiated in a broader settlement. None of this is about theology or historic guilt. It is about costs, benefits, and options as seen from major capitals, not from the streets of Tel Aviv or Gaza. At the end, we come back to a simple definition of real power. You are not elite because you have money, medals, a blue passport, or a golden microphone. You are elite if you can change the trajectory of events. By that metric, certain religious figures, revolutionaries, and statesmen with modest personal wealth were elite. Certain billionaires and presidents are not. They are popular faces attached to someone else's steering wheel. Britain, despite its reduced territory and aging infrastructure, still desperately wants to remain in the group that bends the river of history, not just floats in it. To do this, it needs influence over energy flows, oil, gas, nuclear fuel, influence over financial and information networks, the ability to ignite and freeze conflicts where needed using local actors as tools. If that means playing the US, Israel, Turkey, Iran, or anyone else against each other, the logic of the game does not blush. It has no conscience to hurt. So if we strip away emotional noise, what do we see? The world is splitting into segregated economic and political zones. The dollar system is still powerful, but it increasingly relies on pressure and conflict management instead of genuine attraction. Trump is less a grand strategist and more a convenient carrier for other people's agendas built around his ego and instinct for simple deals. Israel, the Middle East, and various peacekeeping initiatives are part of a longer game where external players try to weaken all locals first, then rewrite the rules. Does this make anyone in this story purely good or purely evil? No. It just means that moral language is being used to cover technical operations, repositioning assets, redrawing borders of influence, and reprogramming who lives in which economic ghetto. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and never confuse loud political speeches with actual control of the board.